I like to break investors down into two categories. One is a cash flow investor. This is somebody who has a long-term strategy. They're traditionally a buy and hold investor. Sometimes they might be a land investor, but traditionally they're a buy and hold investor. Their goal is to pay the property off and to keep it forever. Okay? These investors traditionally hold 1 to 5 properties. The type 2 type of investors are speculators. Speculation is traditionally short term, meaning in my term would be less than 5 years. They traditionally try to ride the market or predict the market. They want to buy on the low end of the market, sell at the top end of the market instead of holding the properties for a long period of time. They typically will leverage their finances because if they can return 10% a year on a property and they're leveraging that property at 80%, then that combined rate of return could be 300, 400%. They typically own several properties at the same time, 6 plus. They fix and flip. They're land speculation, meaning they're buying land thinking that the city's going to grow into it, or they're buying land waiting for maybe retail to move into the area. And home builders. Home builders is a type of speculation investment because they're buying the land and they're speculating that if they build a house on it, that they'll actually be able to sell the property on the back end. So this is important to differentiate these different types of investors because each of these investors is going to want to participate at a different time throughout its shifting market cycle. And so it's important to note that not all investors are trying to achieve the same thing. And because of that, it creates opportunity in different periods of the market to work with different types of investors. Problems that some investors have in order to sell is they might have too much inventory. Some investors need to sell because it's not convenient. The property that they have is not convenient, or the property is what I call a troubled property. They could have a property that's over leveraged. So if I have a high loan to balance on a property and I'm barely cash flowing and I'm moving into a recessionary market, I might want to liquidate my properties that have high balances on them so I'm not forced into having to liquidate my properties that have a low mortgage balance on them later. So liquidating over leveraged properties or properties that are not cash flowing well. Now, as far as speculations go, because speculation properties aren't cash flowing, and in a recessionary market, we don't traditionally see double-digit appreciations or sometimes even appreciation above 3 or 4%, all of a sudden speculation becomes very challenging because the time frame to hold the properties is much longer. So some speculators will want to sell because their property do not have the ability to cash flow. Fix and flip properties and small home builders struggle from the same challenge of short-term money. When you're building a property as a builder, you're using a construction loan, and a construction loan has a due date. And after that due date, you have to pay off the loan or refinance it. Most fix and flippers, I will say, use hard money to finance, and the hard money will be called due at a certain point, or the interest rate will accelerate to a certain point, which will force them into having to sell the property and liquidate or to move into a refinance position. But many fix and flips are not designed to cash flow as rentals, and so most fix and flippers don't desire to rent their properties out. Another problem investors face is vacancies. It becomes vacant and you start to think to yourself, do I want to rent it again, or do I want to sell it? The last is the accidental investor. This is somebody who was a homeowner and for some reason they had to move and they weren't able to sell their house, so they decided to become a landlord and just rent it out instead. And so they become the accidental investor, or if nothing else, the desperate investor, where they were forced into a situation where they had to be an investor. And they don't enjoy it and they don't really want to do it, but it was a means to an end. And if you could solve their problem by getting their home sold, they're usually full of gratitude and happiness.